Hi, everyone. Today, have Dr. Awan, internal medicine doctor from Yale, who's going to walk us through kind of his day in the life of residency and general tips for new interns since he's about to be a third year resident, is it?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's a pleasure to be here, you guys.
So yeah, we appreciate you having you here and helping all, I'm sure, like the nervous, like soon to be interns kind of figure out, what they have in store for them. So before we get into the details of IM residency and intern year, should you even prepare before intern year? Do you think people should just kind of relax and take it easy? And if so, if they're supposed to prepare, or you recommend that they prepare, what's the best way to prepare before intern year starts?
Yeah, that's the age-old question of a type A pre-meds, which we all are, of course. It's pretty straightforward for this one for me, to be honest. I would say absolutely do not prepare anything. There's no way you're going to get to cover internal medicine and how much time you have off before this. Enjoy your stuff. You guys have worked extremely hard to get to this point, and it's only going to get a lot harder after this. So if you have a few weeks in between, you have a couple months in between, go out, do something. This may be one of the last extended periods where you have some time off. So I did some cruises. Picked up a couple hobbies. I didn't pick up a single thing to learn more than I needed to, because you'll learn it. I mean, 3 years doesn't sound like a long time, but you'll learn a lot more than you think you will. But if you really did want to prepare, and some of my classmates did prepare, I don't know if there's a great way. For internal medicine, of course, there's a Mixapp like quick notes or quick book that they have here. It's like a few hundred pages. If you really wanted to read that, you definitely can. Mixapp has let me see if I have it. Actually, it might be helpful. Yeah, here it is. So they have a boards basics. This is probably something you're going to end up doing in preparation for your boards anyways, but it's around 365 pages, some images, some highlighted stuff there. If you really want it, you can get a head start on that. But one thing I wouldn't recommend it. I think you'll have plenty of opportunities.
Generally, what's the schedule like in intern year? And then how does that change from block to block? And how is that different from intern year to your PG Y2s or 3s? How does that change?
It can vary quite a bit. I think depending on the program that you go to, block by block, it can be completely up and down. It really ebbs and flows here. There are some blocks such as the CCU, the cardiac care unit, or the medical intensive care unit. Those are definitely longer and you're working more hours. I would say somewhere close to 70, 80 hours, maybe a few hours over that sometimes. And you're busy. It's 6 days a week, 10, 12 hours a day. And that's kind of all you're able to get done, to be honest, 6 of those days. Now, one day you have off, you just recuperate and do your laundry and remember how to be a human being again and take care of yourself. But then on the other hand, literally it could be, one block after, it could be the following day, for example, on a transition day, you can be working 20, 30 hours a week. So you can be in clinic or you can be in some elective. And it's just night and day different. And you're constantly through residency going through this ups and downs. Depending on the program you go to, the interns definitely can get worked a little harder. So they can definitely have more hours than the senior residents would have. The schedule itself for a typical intern, I would say, on the days in which you're working inpatient, so I work in a primary care program. So they prioritize a lot of outpatient time for us too. The times we're doing inpatient, you can literally be coming in to get sign out at 6:30, for example, from the night team. And let's just say from 6:30 to 8, you're pre-rounding. Some folks get a little more anxious, which is perfectly normal in the beginning. And they'll come in at 5:30, they'll come in at 6 and give themselves around 2 to 2.5 hours to do pre-rounding on the patients. And then rounds come, and regardless of how much you prepare, you're still anxious and you're still nervous and you still feel like you're going to mess up. And that's all perfectly normal. Do your rounds. You go around the patient units and you present to the attending, obviously, things that you guys are probably familiar with if you've done a sub-I already or an acting internship. And then rounds will typically finish somewhere between 10 to 12 in the middle of the day. If it's a new attending who doesn't know the service as well, maybe it can last a little longer, but they'll finish around 12, let's say. And then from 12 to the rest of your time, which is usually until 6:30 p.m., you're just working on the tasks that need to get done. You're admitting patients if new patients come, you're discharging patients, and just a lot of tiny details that somehow add up to 6:30 p.m.
So it was a nice overview of like a typical day and what you had to get done throughout maybe each day of residency. What is your general workflow for how you approach maybe pre-rounding and seeing patients throughout the day, do you like, how do you recommend like going through like labs and images, or like maybe look up certain aspects of their chart before rather than later? And then how do you like round again in the afternoon before you leave? How does that work?
Yeah, no, great question. So I like to keep things simple. So as an intern, you're going to have to work on the note anyways. You're going to have to sign the notes. So some people will basically, they'll have a sheet of paper and they'll write down, their one-liner on top. They'll write down anything that happened overnight, what the patient said to them in the morning, and then vitals. So just the basic SOAP format is usually how you would present it and how you would put around in the morning. So subjective, objective, assessment plan. And I personally actually I come in a little bit earlier and I just basically write the template of the note on Epic, assuming you have Epic or whichever EMR you have. So I'll write the note that I plan on writing in the afternoon anyways, and I'll just fill in the details straight into the note. And right before presentation time, I will just print out that note, double-sided, two pages per side, and I'll just present off of that. So that, that way I'm able to just, by the end of rounds, all my notes are basically done. There might be just small tweaks here and there with the assessment plan based off of what the attending recommended. But from my colleagues, I was one of the first ones usually that was done with notes. And a lot of that was because I presented off of the notes. So they were ready. There's another part to that question.
I also asked if you ended up like rounding again later on in the day on the patients, or is that just like kind of sporadically throughout where you like pick up on patients?
Yeah, no. I think that depends on how busy you get. In an ideal world, I think it's nice to touch base with the family in the afternoon. Oftentimes the senior residents on the team will do that while you're working on your notes and stuff in the afternoon. I think it's nice to touch base with them twice, because otherwise imagine being in this hospital and you only get to see your doctor 5 minutes in the morning and then like 10 minutes during rounds, and the rest of the 24 hours go by and you don't even know. You can't really put a face to the person that's taking care of you, right? And they'll give you useful updates in the afternoon. A lot of patients are really tired in the morning, and you'll get a lot of useful things if you just touch base with them in the afternoon. In terms of formal rounding, that's extremely rare to have two sets of formal rounds. It's usually an informal round. You just go around, just give the patients any updates, and go from there. But yeah, it's not typical, to be honest. Most people just end up going to the room once, but I think it's a nice touch if you can.
Okay, and so you mentioned that you maybe go in a little bit earlier and then set up your chart so that you can just print it off and use that for rounds. I haven't really heard of that being done. It seems like most people tend to write paper charts, or is it more common maybe for residents to do it on the computer? Because that seems a lot more efficient than writing everything down on paper, then transcribing all that stuff on your chart again.
Shredding it basically. No, I would say that's definitely the less common thing to do. Most folks will, they'll write it out on their full sheet of paper and then they'll basically transcribe it and then they'll shred that, and it just seems like too much work to me.
Yeah.
You gotta keep it easy. Everyone works hard enough. Whatever ways you can make your life easier, you gotta find them.
Okay. And in regards to, you mentioned EMR, is there a certain way that you feel like you structure charts, or any kind of tips that you give for charting maybe more efficiently or better, even in regards to general notes, or even like admit or discharge notes or things like that?
I would say dot phrases. So that if you're fortunate enough to have a system like Epic, I'm not as familiar with the other EMRs, but in Epic, literally, it's basically templated. So I'll make a template. I'll actually spend some time before the rotation. I'll make that template. So that way, whenever I start a new note, I'll just put dot whatever progress note, CCU dot progress note, floors, and it'll auto-populate everything. It'll auto-populate the subjective. It'll auto-populate the objective, the assessment plan. Obviously, I'll have to work on, but it'll pull in the vitals for you. It'll pull in the labs for you. It'll pull in any supplemental oxygen that they're on, and it's already all laid out for me. So I would just press a key to go through it. Basically, for Epic, I think it's F2, and then I would just be able to type everything in pretty quickly there.
Do you recommend starting from scratch, or do you recommend using like an attendings or like a fellow residents as like a kind of like a basis?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend a fellow residents. If you ask the attending, every one of them is going to say, "Don't ever copy forward a note. It's terrible. EMR is everything that's wrong with the world." So don't do that. But yeah, and I would ask a senior resident. I think they usually have some pretty helpful dot phrases for you to steal from them, and you can always just make sure you spend that time though before the rotation to make that template, because it'll save you a lot of time in the long run.
And any tips for staying on top of orders or sign in, sign out, handoffs, consults, things like that. 'Cause it seems like there's so many things, and maybe as a med student, you're not as responsible to keep track of like everything that's happening because someone's always there like to actually take charge. But then when you're a resident, you actually have to have that responsibility to like follow up with orders and labs and make sure that everything's going done or getting done behind the scenes, like consults and everything. So how do you stay on top of all that? Do you use like checklists or what do you do?
So everyone's going to have a different system. I have one that I found particularly helpful to keep track of the tasks. I know I told you guys that I present off of the progress notes for the day that I print out. But in terms of keeping track of the tasks, I actually have a one pager for all my patients. Let's say I have 8 patients. I fold the paper basically in 8 pieces. So each patient gets like one small little column. And you can make this as intricate as you want. Of the 8 squares that you have, I will cut that into 4 pieces also. And then one in the 4 things I'll put in there is 1 is orders that need to be made. So I'll write those down during rounds. 2 is basically the things I need to follow up on. Like, let's say I ordered an EKG on this patient. I got to remember to follow up on that. I ordered a head CT on this patient. I got to make sure I follow up on that. And then the third one is consults and calls. So I'll put, if we're doing any consults, I'll put the consults there. I'll put any family calls, any physical phone calls you need to make. And the fourth one, I just leave as miscellaneous. And miscellaneous is, you'll know what miscellaneous is when things come up. If it doesn't fall into one of those 3 squares, it goes into my miscellaneous tab. And then after that, I just check off things. I put a box next to each of the tasks, and I check off things throughout the day. And I find that splitting up into 4 pieces particularly helpful because what you don't want to do is you don't want to leave consults for the end, for example, right? So it helps me prioritize. I'll do consults, orders, and then follow up on the tasks. And then the miscellaneous stuff I'll do at the end. And then in that same patient's little box that I have, I'll just put 3 tiny boxes. I'll basically have 3 checks at the bottom. The one of the checks is, did I finish the note? If I finish the note, I check it. The second one is, did I order labs for the morning? I'll check that off. And the third one is, basically, did I complete sign out and did I update the sign out? So this is just an example, but I think it's particularly helpful to find a system that works for you to stay organized. Because if you just have it written all over your progress note, like, some people just write it randomly in whichever paper they find. I think that's a recipe for missing things. But if you just create a system, it doesn't have to be my system. Just ask your senior residents and stick with that. And then see if you like it. And if you don't like it, drop it. Make your own system.
Kind of going on to more of like the performance aspect of things, how did you study in residency, if you even had time to study? And how do you recommend people study?
So studying is one of those things you're definitely going to have to make some time for. So first off, you have to take the step 3. Some programs will let you push it a little later, but I think most people end up taking it sometime in their first year, which you should, because that's when you're going to remember the most peds and that's when you're going to remember the most OBGYN. Trust me, you will not you will not be able to remember some of the intricacies of the phases of delivery 3 years out, for example. So you will have to study for the step 3. I think that's a separate thing. Most people end up using UWorld and just run through the question banks for that. There's not really a gold standard like the first day, like there is for step 1. So it's definitely flexible. You can try out different things. But aside from that, residency has a lot of information and you have to find some way to review it and some standardized way that you can go through and keep track of it in your mind. I would say the most I did, to be honest, was just really pay attention to the patient. I know it sounds a little cliched, like some old school docs would say, but really learn from the patients. I, throughout the day, would basically make a list of things on the bottom of my papers saying things that I didn't quite understand and maybe was a little too embarrassed to ask during rounds, things that I felt like I had a knowledge gap, which is quite a bit in the beginning. And I would write it down. And at some point throughout the day, I would make sure to look up those things. So I think that's a very helpful way to have a focused and relevant studying. And it keeps it interesting because then you can apply it to your patients too. And it's not just random things that you're studying throughout the day. So I would say I did most of my learning just from the patient cases that were presented to me. That's for the most part. And then I think it's helpful to just have a little segue into what type of resources you can use if you have a clinical question. There's definitely people that are more nuanced than I am, but the things that I usually go to is, of course, Up to Date would be one. But lately, I've been finding myself leaning a little more towards something called Dynamed, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dynamed, but it's a simpler version of Up to Date without getting lost in the weeds too much. So it literally will present it. It'll present any topic, COPD exacerbation, for example, which you'll see a lot. It'll present it. I can't remember each of the sections, but it's basically epidemiology, it's risk factors, it's clinical presentation, and then management. And it's just a straightforward way in which they present it. So I really like Dynamed quite a bit. I can't speak highly enough of it. And then throughout, I think I'm transitioning into my third year now, and I'm starting to think a little more about boards. So I'm probably going to start switching over my studying a lot more to Mixapp now. You're going to have to buy it at some point. This was just a short version of it. There's a much bigger stack of books where this came from. So I'll probably switch you to that. But once again, I can't really speak too much about third year. But first 2 years, yeah, definitely just learn. First year is learn from your patients. Please don't take out textbooks. Please don't spend your few precious days that you have off studying. I think that's just a recipe for failure. There's some people that do well with that, but I would say most people, that's just a recipe for burnout.
And in regards to studying, if someone were to focus on maybe several important diseases, are there any certain diseases or pathologies or even medications or just general disease processes that you'd recommend them to be like really solid on, like heart failure or CPD? Or
yeah, I guess this going back to your earlier question, if you really only want to spend a couple days studying for something, I would probably read the up-to-date chapter or the Dynamed chapters on specific conditions. I would say the ones that are most common, definitely COPD exacerbation. This is inpatient side. Remember, there's a whole slew of things for outpatient, which is something that I find a little more interest in. But for inpatient, I think which is most common for intern years for most hospitals, COPD exacerbation, you have heart failure exacerbation, pneumonia is a big one, cellulitis is another big one, DKA is another big one, and definitely a lot of alcohol withdrawals too. So I'm sure there's plenty I'm missing, but if you just focus on that, I think you definitely hit the ground running.
And any tips on just doing well in general in intern year and making a good impression on the attendings?
I think the biggest thing they're looking for is just people that have a good attitude. You can definitely get quite busy and overwhelmed, but if you just stay calm, have a positive attitude, just take the admissions that come to you. Don't keep trying to give them to someone else. I think that resonates pretty well with people. In terms of impressing people, it's a little different than, at least my experience, a little different than when you're a fourth year and you're coming in with the article for every new patient that you see, and you have like some teaching things prepared for the group. As an intern, no one's going to expect that of you. You can definitely bring that if you want. I think that's probably a bonus. But the biggest thing is just being curious and staying organized with your tasks. Because one of the best things you can do as an intern is just make sure that the tasks get done. That falls on you. So yeah, I would say nothing specific aside from just staying organized and having a positive attitude.
What are like things like red flags that tell you if a patient's like really sick versus maybe not so sick, and when should you call an attending or someone else for help?
So one of the biggest things you can have is humility when you approach intern year. I think the most dangerous interns are the ones who think they know what they're doing, and by definition, interns don't really know what they're doing, and that's kind of the nature of the way it's set up. So have an extremely low threshold for getting people involved, an extremely low threshold for your resident, for your attending. If you feel like you have to ask yourself, should I get someone involved? You should probably get someone involved. And as the year goes on, you'll realize that you're relying on other people less and less. I think that's a natural progression of intern year. It's not about you. It's not about how good you look in front of your attending. It's not about the amount of information that you know, right? In the end, it's about, does the patient get the care that they deserve? And that's actually, there's no number two. That's 1, 2, and 3. Just make sure the patients are well taken care of. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people let their ego get in the way of that.
And any tips on working well in a team with nurses, pharmacists, RTs, and all these other health professions?
There's a spectrum of how interns, I guess, approach this. Some folks will come in pretty strong-headed, saying, I'm the physician, I clearly know X, Y, and Z much better. But I'll tell you right now, as someone that's going to third year, I will never know as much about the different types of vents and the different types of supplement oxygen as RT will, as respiratory therapists. This is no way. That's what they do. That's their bread and butter, right? I'll never be able to assess someone's physical rehab needs as well as physical therapy will. So you have to approach it with humility. I'll never know the types of lines that someone needs or the tubing, this and that, as well as the nurses do. Or I'll never be able to assess wounds like nurses do, for example. So you have to approach it with humility. As an intern, just there's so much I would learn from them, rather than treating them as someone that you think you should know more of. I would just approach with humility and say, listen, you probably know more about this than I do. And don't be afraid to ask them for help and ask them for the knowledge that they've built over the years in their particular career.
Okay. And what's been so far the most rewarding and challenging aspects of residency?
I would say rewarding has been being able to take care of your patients without really relying on too much else, right? As a med student, for example, there's this natural tendency of not feeling like you take ownership of the patients. That's completely different when you're an intern, and particularly more so when you're a resident. These are your patients. You're their primary doctor, and in the end, you're responsible for what happens to them. So I think it's rewarding when you see a patient get admitted and they get discharged, and they're in a much better health than they were before. Or, for example, a patient, in which I find more rewarding, to be honest, when the patient comes to your clinic and you are able to build this connection with them over the course of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and they come back to you over and over again. And if you're fortunate enough to be in a residency in which you get good continuity, these are your patients. This is your patient panel. They refer to you as their doctor, and you make phone calls to them, and you see them in clinic, and you know them extremely well at both the things that make up their health and the things that make them human beings, and the relationships that they have and the struggles that they have. I think there's a lot of beauty in that. So that was definitely one of the things I found most rewarding of it all. Challenging is hours, man. You're going to get worked left and right. It is what it is. There's no way to get around it. Some programs are easier than others, but in the end, 80-hour work weeks are 80-hour work weeks. And when you're in the ICU, you're going to hit that.
Since you brought up the hours, how do you balance with like the crazy intern and resident schedule? How do you balance your like having hobbies and fitness and free time and relationships, even since you're married? Yeah. And, people are, when they're residents, they're often married or dating even. How do you balance all those things with the limited free time, or is there no balance?
Like medical school was, the balance is the balance that you want to make, right? It's what's important to you and what you're willing to sacrifice on either ends, right? So I think there's some people that come in saying that all I'm going to do is study for this next 3 years, and I'm going to hit certain benchmarks in my knowledge, and I'm going to get certain scores on my tests. And I think most of those people get what they want, right? You get what you want out of it. I personally came into residency saying, listen, I love being a physician, and I love intern. I do love interning, actually. I love being a physician more so than anything else, but that's not all I am. I would say that's a small part of what I am. There's a lot of other things that I'm interested in. A lot of my passions, both inside and outside of medicine, the relationships that I have, my wife, my family. So it's a lot. And I knew I wanted to prioritize all of that. So I came in and I accept the fact that if I would probably have more medical knowledge if all I did was just study this book day in and day out. But I'm finding that balance, and I'm okay with that balance, because in the end, physician isn't the only thing that you are. You're a human being, and that comes with a lot of responsibility and a lot of passions outside of medicine.
Okay. And any tips on managing finances? Because after med school, a lot of people have tons of debt, and then you're working crazy hours, but making like 50 to 60K a year usually. How do you recommend managing finances? Do you recommend like investing or anything now, or just trying to like pay the bills and kind of live frugally and get through everything, like residency, before you start making that attending salary?
I think that's a tough one to answer, because everyone's financial situation is just so vastly different. Some folks leave without any loans, and some folks leave with quite a bit of debt. I would say, first off, I guess I wouldn't pick a program based off of the salary that you get. I think the differences are pretty minimal, even if it's $5,000, $10,000. I would definitely keep that lower on the list of reasons why you pick a program. I would probably keep track. So I kept track of things, of all my expenses and all my loans, which some folks have multiple lenders. I would keep track of all of them on mint.com. And, I wish they paid me to advertise for them, but they don't. But here I am. I do love mint.com quite a bit. Look into different options. Look into refinancing your loans. Even if that means you have to give up some of the public benefits of having public loans. But yeah, I think that question is a little tough to answer, because everyone's situation is so different. I would probably approach someone with a little more knowledge about that, to be honest.
In terms of, there's a lot of stress and burnout, maybe even in residency. Do you have any tips on like resources that people can reach out to? Is there like often like a hospital, like a residency, like wellness committee or something, or is there other resources that you recommend to deal with maybe someone's maybe psychological state, or would you recommend they maybe seek outside like psych help?
So I think that's going to depend on the resources that are available to you, it's a tough time. Yes, some folks unfortunately have it a little tougher than others, and some folks react to it a little with a little more difficulty than others do. Be easy on yourself. It's not easy working 80 hours a week, and there's lots of things that are happening at home, that are happening at work, and et cetera, et cetera. It can take a toll on people. Don't be afraid to get the help that you need, whether that's through the programs whether that's through the resources that the program offers, which fortunately Yale offers quite a bit for the folks that need it, or whether that's your psychiatrist or your psychologist, whether that's your friends, your family members. It's a tough time, and just don't be afraid to get the help that you need.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and you mentioned being humble, and then coming into things with maybe like an open mind and caring for your patients. Any other kind of mindsets that you would recommend adopting in intern year and residency?
I would say two things would be definitely humility, approaching with humility, because you're going to learn quite a bit, right? But if you knew everything, you wouldn't be here, right? You wouldn't have any need for residency. The whole point of residency is to get you from one level to another. So humility, definitely, and flexibility. Because like I said, some days you're working 80 hours a week, some days you're working 30 hours. Some days you have a plan to graduate in 3 years, and other days life comes up and now you're on a 4-year track, 5-year track. Just be flexible with it, because I think the folks that have the hardest time are the folks that feel the need to control every aspect of their residency and every aspect of intern year. And that's just not the nature of life. You can't control life. Life comes. You just got to ride the wave and ride the roller coaster with its ups and downs. So flexibility and humility, I think, are two important mindsets to have.
Okay. Any final advice, or do you feel like you said everything?
Just be you, be humble, be a great person. It's intern year is gonna be tons of fun. You're gonna realize that you know so much more than you do. You're gonna make some amazing friends on the way. You're gonna learn a lot about yourself. Have fun with it. It's a fun year. Despite you working quite a bit, somehow you make use of the time that you have off, and you may find yourself at the end of the year, at the end of the year, that you've done more than you would have if you just had the entire year off, for example. So just have fun with it. I mean, it's part of life. It's sucky. No one really enjoys intern year more than their second and third year, for example. But you get through it. You get by, and there's always light at the end of the tunnel there. So.
And finally, do you have anything that you want to shout out or anything? Any organizations or brands or anything like that?
Systemic racism and social injustices are starting to see the light of day. So it's Black Lives Matter, obviously, is such a big one right now. I'm part of an organization called Need Masks Today, and we're working on getting people masks, in the COVID-19 pandemic. And we already see this as a disease. This is a pandemic that's disproportionately affecting people of color. So whatever we can do in terms of acknowledging that and reducing some of not just the health disparities that we're seeing in COVID-19, but even the ones that we'll see after it with whatever disease processes that come up. That's it. And a shout out to my wife, of course, who's a fellow resident and is definitely part of the reason why I'm so balanced and still staying sane.
For sure. Okay, so thank you again, Dr. Awan, for all your gems. There are a lot of poetic parts. I liked it.
Oh.
I'm sure everyone will benefit from it.
Yeah, no, I hope so. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I love your videos. Keep doing the work that you're doing, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.